All right, folks, hello and welcome back to online English class. Hope you guys are doing well today. Today is Monday, April 20th, so we're going to start with some top of the week announcements before we jump back into our analysis of Heart of Darkness, looking specifically at OTN 3, which analyzes the rising action of Marlow's journey. All right, so just to reiterate, there are no vocabulary and grammar quizzes. There is a new discussion grade procedure, okay, so you get a discussion grade every unit measuring the quality of your engagement in the class. I measure everything from your posture in the class to your note-taking in the class to your verbal engagement in the classroom discussion, okay? So obviously we can't do that in the normal way, so what I'm going to do is just I'm going to measure your discussion grade by the quality of your comments that you leave on the videos, okay? So first I'd like for you to you can either leave a question about the content, a summary of what was discussed, or a reflection on what was discussed, all right? So you can do one of those three things. You don't have to do all three of them. You can do one of the three on a daily basis, all right, and that will constitute your discussion grade, okay? Aside from that, you need to make sure that you email me your reading check of Heart of Darkness Part 1 and the beginning of Part 2 by 3 p.m. today. Throughout the course of this week, you need to be finishing reading Part 2 of Heart of Darkness, and you need to complete our OTNs as we complete them in class. All right. Aside from all that, you need to make sure that your quarter 4 essay, which is going to be due around a month from now, is moving from your back burner to your front burner. That analysis of Canterbury Tales that requires a little bit of research. All right. So we'll be talking more about that essay in the future, but for now, we want to keep our sights set on our analysis of Heart of Darkness, okay? So we return to Heart of Darkness, and we remember the content of our lecture from Friday, which sort of established a background for the rising action, or our analysis of the rising action of Marlow's journey. Okay, Marlow's journey is a pilgrimage, okay? So very much like Dante's pilgrim in the Inferno, Marlow views his journey as a kind of journey into the heart of the world that he inhabits. That's why he says at the end of the exposition of his narrative that he felt like he was going to the center of the earth. All right, obviously the center of the earth in the Inferno is a symbol of the center of the pilgrim's soul, but also the center of the fallen world, which whenever it or we decided to rebel against God, so to the rest of the world, all people together, all places, all elements of the environment also fell. All right, that was a transcendent truth that hovered over all of creation after that momentous event. All right, Marlow, in the same way, very similar to the Pilgrim, is hoping to investigate the reality at the core of the center of the earth, and also, like the Pilgrim, to find hope. All right, to find a sacred fire that illuminates this darkness, that is at the back of all of our efforts, all of our labor on the earth. Okay. So not only is he looking for a moral justification of colonization of the African continent, but he's looking for a kind of moral justification of his own existence, okay? He is seeking for an idea, something to live his life for, or as we often say, something to live for. All right. So the first stop along that or in that journey is at the outer station, a trading post of the Belgian Congo Company, 30 miles upriver from the mouth of the Congo. Okay, this is the first place that Marlow stops, as we discussed in our SQ3R. Now, in the outer station, we get Marlow's reflection on what he saw there, and it is far, okay, very far afield from being something that encouraged Marlow or exposed him to a kind of operation that was morally coherent. Rather, all right, what he is mostly met with are images of waste and images of deep injustice, okay? This begins to illustrate the ways in which Marlow is finding, all right, more and more in his pilgrimage not what he's looking for, but increasingly exposed to meaninglessness, okay, or darkness, something that he cannot understand. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of those significant images. All right, so on page 1, or part 1, page 61, if you have the Barnes & Noble edition, all right, Marlow begins to describe his time at the outer station. He says, I came upon a boiler wallowing in the grass, then found a path leading up the hill. Okay, the path turned aside for the boulders and also for an undersized railway truck lying there on its back with its wheels in the air. One was off. The thing looked as dead as the carcass of some animal. Okay, I came upon more pieces of decaying machinery, a stack of rusty rails. To the left of a clump of trees made a shady spot where dark things seemed to stir feebly. I blinked. The path was steep. A horn tooted to the right, and I saw the black people run. A heavy and dull detonation shook the ground. A puff of smoke came out of the cliff, and that was all. No change appeared on the face of the rock. Okay, so they're blasting away at this cliffside, but according to Marlow, right, he doesn't see any changes on the face of the rock. He isn't seeing results, all right, that would make all of this blasting make sense, and he ends up calling it something. He called it objectless blasting was all the work that was going on. All right. He continues on in 63. We're going to analyze all these images in a moment. All right. He says, I avoided a vast artificial, which is to say man-made, hole somebody had been digging on the slope, the purpose of which I found it impossible to divine, to figure out. It wasn't a quarry or a sandpit anyhow. It was just a hole. It might have been connected to the philanthropic desire of giving the criminals something to do. I don't know. Then I nearly fell into a very narrow ravine, almost no more than a scar in the hillside. I discovered that a lot of imported drainage pipes for the settlement had been tumbled in there. There wasn't one that was not broken. It was a wanton smash-up. Okay? So, in other words, in the outer station, Marlow is confronted by all of these sights and sounds that are essentially or what he believes to be meaningless. All right, the work that is being done doesn't make sense. It's not only not accomplishing the goals, all right, that the work seemed or would seem to reasonably need to be connected to, but also in a larger sense, it's not connected to a kind of moral justification, making the work in and of itself seem meaningless. Okay, so in order to understand this more fully, we need to meditate a little more closely on the implicit logic of the work, okay, the labor of colonization. Okay, so where Marlow is, all right, is a space where European individuals have taken it upon themselves to go to a place that is not their homeland, all right, to inhabit it, take control of it, employ the people who actually do live there in businesses that are profiting the Europeans, all right, and they're saying that what they are doing is the right thing, all right? So, in other words, if this is not just simple like theft and an invasion that inhibits the rights of those African individuals to govern themselves, which, by the way, the protection of private property, theft, okay, not theft, and the sort of right of individuals to govern themselves, those are premises that are near and dear to the heart of modern Western ideology, yes? All right? So if it isn't just simple threat and the inhibition or the sort of taking away of the rights of individuals to govern themselves, then it must be something that benefits the colonized, all right? In other words, the people who are there doing the colonization need to be doing work that has, again, a kind of moral justification, something that is instructing the native individuals on stuff that they need to know, all right, to improve their lives. All right, this is what makes the work of colonization make sense, right? It's what makes the work of colonization meaningful, okay? Much in the same way, Marlow recognizes that in a larger sense, any work that we as human beings do, because we have been created with the ability to conceive of moral abstractions, needs to be rooted in, all right, a kind of telos, all right? So think of this word telos, which is, I'm not sure if you've ever heard it before, but it means purpose, all right, or end goal. All right, if we do, for example, all right, if I'm going to spend all of my time, all of my days teaching literature to teenagers, okay, and my life is not going to sort of deconstruct into absurdity, then there would need to be something inherently valuable about all of the hours and time that I spent teaching literature to students. Okay, that literature would need to be inherently valuable. The ideas that that literature explored would need to be inherently valuable. All right, in order for the work to not sort of dissolve into an intolerable absurdity. Like, for instance, if you spent your whole life just digging a hole and then filling it back up again. Sure, you'd be doing hard work every day, wouldn't you? Yeah, okay, you ever dug a big hole before, a massive pit? Takes some sweat, right? But, all right, that kind of labor is intolerable to a human being because it is disconnected from a telos. It is disconnected from a purpose that makes sense. All right? So if colonization is work that is not meaningless, or worse yet, immoral, then it needs to be connected to a purpose, a discernible purpose, all right, that is for the benefit of the colonized. All right? Very much like any work needs to be connected for it to be tolerable to the human being. It needs to be connected to a purpose. That's why a lot of young people complain about school. They don't understand why they're there. All right? It's a lot of work, okay? But why am I doing it? Okay? Human beings are created with this desire, this deep need for telos, for purpose, for end goal. Right? For the why. Not just the how, but the why. All right? Why one is working. Okay? And the big why for colonization is because the barbarian savages need to be taught how to be civil. And we are going to do that. And one of the ways that we are going to do that, one of the many ways, is we are going to give them industrial technology that will improve their quality of life, that will allow them to have an industrial, modern, consumer, capitalist economy just like ours. And everybody knows that that is the bomb. All right? So, ironically, all right, when Marlow shows up in this environment, okay, the boiler, which is a kind of a steam engine, all right, that was at the heart of, or at the core of, the Industrial Revolution. Without the steam boiler, you do not have the Industrial Revolution, right? And there, right, what do we see? We see a boiler doing what? Conquering the landscape, okay, enlightening the savages. Okay, improving everyone's life. We see an African family working in a factory producing goods that is African owned for their own bit. Nope. We just see a boiler wallowing in the grass. What wallows? Pigs wallow. That's bestial language that personifies the boiler. Ironically, instead of making the landscape less brutal, right, the machines are becoming brutalized or brutish. All right, the boiler's wallowing in the grass. The railway truck is lying on its back, all right, with its wheels in the air. One was off. The thing looked as dead as the carcass of some animal. And then he comes upon more what he calls decaying machinery, okay? Notice also, just to continue another kind of motif, that all of this is out in the blinding light, which serves, all right, not to illuminate the darkness of the environment, all right, but rather simply to emphasize the insanity, all right, of the proceedings that are going on in front of them, the purposelessness of that which is going on. Okay, so the machines that are supposed to be bringing the natural environment under the control and dominion of both the colonists and their native partners, all right, are personified as dead, dying beast. All right, the technology that is, like I said, supposed to be making the landscape less brutal is becoming brutish, brute-like. It's being killed by the natural environment. Okay, it's a kind of symbolic reversal of what the colonial, of what the work of colonization is supposed to be in the first place. Right? The vast artificial whole then there becomes a kind of symbol, all right, of the empty, unnatural, the artificial, unnatural, empty labor being undertaken in the Belgian Congo by the Belgian Congo Company. It should be filled with meaning. All right, it should be clearly connected to a telos, but is in fact, all right, as Marlow is sort of troubled by and reckoning with in his language and sort of helping to illustrate to us in his description, its purposelessness. Okay, so and then all of this is, the irony is deepened by the fact that the whole scene is bathed in this blinding light. All right, which does not illuminate the darkness of the African continent, because the sort of torchbearers of the Europeans are there, illuminating all of the darkness with all of their Western technology and Western ways of life that are coming to save the savage from his savage ways. But rather, all right, the light there just simply illuminates the insanity of the proceedings, as I already said. The work, in other words, the labor, all right, the work, and the machines that perform that labor, all right, are simply mockeries of the spread of some kind of, quote, sacred fire. All right. Now, the irony of the scene gets even deeper on page 162. Okay, so let's read this section together. A slight clinking behind me made me turn my head. 6 black men advanced in a file, holding up the path. They walked erect and slow, balancing small baskets full of earth on their heads, and the clink kept time with their footsteps. Black rags were wound round their loins, and the short ends behind waggled to and fro like tails. I could see every rib. The joints of their limbs were like knots in a rope. Each had an iron collar on his neck, and all were connected together with a chain whose bites swung between them, rhythmically clinking. Another report from the cliff made me think suddenly that the ship of war I had seen firing into a continent. It was the same kind of ominous voice, but these men could by no stretch of imagination be called enemies. They were called, emphasis on the word called, they were called criminals, and the outraged law, like the bursting shells, had come to them, an insoluble mystery from the sea. Okay, so these criminals, all right, these quote-unquote criminals have broken the laws of their European colonists, all right, but obviously they don't understand what those laws are. All right, they've broken this quote-unquote outraged law, and they're being punished for it, which is a sort of expression of quote-unquote justice. All right, but they are being punished by individuals who are there stealing their land, stealing their raw materials from them. All right, who ironically fancy themselves capable of teaching these individuals Western traditions like common laws, as if these individuals, these human beings, these natives, did not have law codes or legal systems of their own, okay, which they did. All right, all groups of people have codes by which their behaviors are organized. Okay, they just perhaps don't have lawyers and complicated legal systems like ours that often, ironically, do not help us establish and pursue justice. Much in the same way, ironically, these criminals, right, are being punished by the individuals who are the most guilty of a crime in the scenario. This reminds, in this scenario, right? This reminds Marlow of what he saw with the French steamer or the French warship blasting away at their quote-unquote enemies in the continent, okay? This is just a war. This is an endeavor. This is a punishment that simply makes no sense, all right? This, again, just sort of satirizes the Belgian Congo Company's colonial efforts. Not only is the work that they're doing disconnected from a discernible moral purpose, the effort to spread a Western law code, all right, another thing that Europeans considered themselves masters of, not, and again, not all Europeans, okay, this is not true, but it's true of the sort of moral backing in the scramble for Africa period, all right? It's this assumption that we needed to share the way that we do law with the barbarian, all right? But it's clearly, when applied in the colonial setting, duplicitous and collapses into absurdity, all right? When Marlow observes it carefully, all right, the justice system that is meant to, right, punish the quote-unquote criminal ceases to make sense as the entity, the company that enforces the code, is the greatest thief of all, all right? If they're going to punish theft or any other breach of a law code that protects the safety and well-being of their citizens, if they are going to apply some kind of moral standard, which you do whenever you establish a law code and then enforce it, all right, they should start by punishing themselves and leaving the land that they have stolen in the name of colonization, in the name of spreading the sacred fire, all right? Now, this sort of irony is reflected in Marlow's tone as he says, after all, I was a part. He recognized that he is a part of the great cause of these high and just proceedings. Okay, clearly he's being ironic here. He does not believe these are high, but rather low, and not just, but rather unjust, and not great, but rather mean or small. Right? What really is going on here is a cash grab. All right? This is money grubbing. This is materialism. All right? That is sort of dressed up in the fancy clothes of spreading some kind of sacred fire. All right? So this impression is then deepened. All right? On page 64. In which Marlow describes some suffering bodies in the shade, okay? He says that he describes them as dying slowly, it was very clear. They were also not enemies, they were not criminals, they were nothing earthly now, he says. Nothing but black shadows of disease and starvation lying confusedly in the greenish gloom. Brought from all the recesses of the coast and all the legality of time contracts, lost in uncongenial surroundings, fed on unfamiliar food, they sickened, became inefficient, and were then allowed to crawl away and rest. These moribund shapes were free as air and nearly as thin. I began to distinguish the gleam of the eyes under the trees. Then, glancing down, I saw a face near my hand. The black bones reclined at full length with one shoulder against the tree. Notice the ways in which Marlow's language dehumanizes who he is describing, okay? They're nothing earthly now. They're shadows of disease. They're just black bones. Reclined at a full length with one shoulder against the tree, and slowly the eyelids rose and the sunken eyes looked up at me, enormous and vacant, a kind of blind white flicker in the depths of the orbs, which died out slowly. The man seemed young, almost a boy, but, with them, it's hard to tell. I found nothing else to do but offer him one of my good Swede's ship's biscuits I had in my pocket. Okay, so Marlow takes some compassion on the suffering individual. The fingers closed slowly on it and held. There was no other movement and no other glance. He tied a bit of white worsted round his neck. Why? Where did he get it? Was it a badge, an ornament, a charm, a propitiatory act? Was there any idea at all that connected it? Okay, so once again, Marlow, in all of the details of the scene, is looking for some kind of idea, some kind of meaning that connects what he's seeing, but increasingly cannot find anything that makes sense, an idea at the back of anyone's actions. All of them are absurd, okay? All of them are meaningless, right? It looked startling round his black neck, this bit of white thread from beyond the seas. Okay, near the same tree, two more bundles of acute angles sat with their legs drawn up. One with his chin propped on his knees stared at nothing in an intolerable and appalling manner. While I stood horror-struck, all right, skip down, one of these creatures rose to his hands and knees and went off on all fours toward the river to drink. He lapped out of his hand, then sat up in the sunlight, crossing his shins in front of him, and after a time let his woolly head fall on his breastbone. I didn't want any more loitering in the shade. Okay? So, in this extended description, okay, Marlow is sort of deepening the irony of the injustice and meaninglessness of the scene as a whole. Notice the ways in which his description of these dehumanized, suffering shadows or shades alludes to the ways in which sinners, justly punished for their rebellion against a good God, are punished in the inferno. All right, specifically, the language that when he describes these suffering shadows as bundles of, quote, acute angles, that is a reference to the description of the sinners in Canto 34. All right, and we could get Dante's Inferno out and look at that, but just trust me. All right, in the Inferno, the bodies of the sinners are described as being worked into glass at all kinds of tight angles. They've lost any kind of control of their own bodies, and they are forever frozen in uncomfortable kinds of positions. In that same way, all right, these suffering shades, all right, are described as kind of bundles of acute angles. All right. Now, this is ironic, okay, because Inferno, all right, here again, Conrad is drawing our attention to Inferno, alluding to it, and alluding specifically to Canto 34. And in Canto 34, the dominant theme of that piece of text is Dante's meditation on God's justice, all right, as he punishes those righteously that rebel treacherously against his good, beneficent in authority. So in the Inferno, those who rebelled against and betrayed their benefactor are justly punished for their rejection of God's beneficent care and their pursuit of death and destruction in his world and for his world. Okay, that is a just punishment, right? But here in the outer station, in direct contrast, the ostensible or seeming quote-unquote benefactors, the Europeans, of the colonized population, those who are those who are the recipients of their benefaction, all right, the benefactors, ironically, betray the native population, making them suffer for rebelling against their unrighteous rule. Okay, this is unjust. This is insane. This is disconnected from any kind of idea at the back of the work. Okay, so in other words, the colonization of these individuals collapses into moral absurdity. Okay. Now, finally, this impression is deepened and solidified in the description of the accountant. Okay, let me read these descriptions and we'll be done for the day. When near the buildings, I met a white man in such an unexpected elegance of get-up that in the first moment I took him for a sort of vision. All right, so in other words, he seems like a sort of supernatural creature, a kind of supernatural creature that is dressed all in white. Okay, so you should be thinking angel, right? I saw a high starched collar, white cuffs, a light alpaca jacket, snowy trousers, a clear necktie, and varnished boots. No hat. Hair parted, brushed, oiled, under a green-lined parasol held in a big white hand. He was amazing and had a pen holder behind his ears. I shook hands with this miracle and learned he was the company's chief accountant. Okay, so this quote-unquote miracle, dressed completely in white, that looks like a sort of vision, right, is a kind of ironic angel, okay, that adds irony to the already insane and ironic and absurd scene, okay, where this accountant, where this quote-unquote angel is obviously juxtaposing or contrasting the typical role that angels play, which is to be spokespersons, to be conduits of God, all right, servants of God, all right, that come and bring glad tidings of great joy to mankind, who herald God's work in the world. Much in the same way, all right, the European colonists are meant to be heralds of the good, all right, coming and bringing a kind of gospel, good news of great joy, all right, to the savage, introducing them to civil ways of life, benefiting them as their benefactors. And here, this sort of ironic angel, okay, this chief accountant, whose job it is, all right, to sort of keep the books, to keep account of the company's doings in the Congo, is so deeply incapable of truly accounting for the atrocities and horrors that are all around him, that, okay, despite the fact that there are people dying all around him, there's a literal graveyard outside his door, and inside of his office people are dying of sickness. It is obvious that this operation is not in the best interest of those that they are colonizing. It is obvious. It is self-evident to the individual who can account for the atrocities around him that this is unjust, that this is unrighteous. And yet this sort of seeming miracle, all right, has the quote-unquote backbone, all right, to keep making sure that he irons his clothes in the morning, parts his hair, and keeps his entries just exactly right. He keeps working despite the fact that the work is teleologically, in other words, its telos, is clearly absurd and definitely immoral, okay, and definitely self-evidently wrong, okay. Marlow ironically says, okay, in the great demoralization of the land, he kept up his appearance. That's backbone. Now, normally we describe people with backbone as a compliment, all right? What he means by the fact that you can stand up straight and keep thinking of yourself as a good man, despite the obvious ways in which what you are doing is not good, is stupid. It's imbecilic. It's a kind of backbone that is simply blindness. His starched collars and got-up shirt fronts were achievements of character, Marlow says, once again, ironically. Okay? So, again, in the outer station, dominant impression here that we've been driving at, what Marlow sees is something far afield from the morally coherent colonial efforts, the morally coherent kind of work that he's looking for. Rather, what he finds is a place bathed in light that does not illuminate something good, but rather simply emphasizes and illuminates a kind of moral absurdity at the heart of this station's operations. Okay? Hope you guys have a great day. Make sure you're keeping up with your reading, and we're going to continue our work tomorrow on Heart of Darkness.